on some farms, we're seeing that weights are coming in, stock are slightly behind target. So it's more important than ever now for the remainder of the grazing season, to ensure that the grass quality is right up there, as high a quality grass as you can produce, to maybe even compensate for the late spring and the difficult grazing conditions so far this year.
Hello and welcome to the Beef Edge, the Teagasc Beef podcast, for all your latest news, information and advice for Irish beef farmers. I'm Catherine Egan, and on this week's episode I'm joined by DairyBeef 500 advisor Tommy Cox to get some tips to manage your dairy beef system in the coming weeks, and Teagasc advisor John Kilboyle to discuss the National DairyBeef 500 Open Day on the farm of Keith and Olivia Lowry on the 9th of July in County Galway. Tommy, what are some of the key grassland management tips for dairy beef farmers currently moving into July and into August? Particularly this year, we've seen a lot of variation in growth rates and weather conditions have been very changeable.
Yeah, very difficult year, Catherine. Probably turnout, especially in the west, delayed. Cattle went in, cattle went back out. So grass was very, very difficult to manage. In some farms that we're visiting right around the country, we're seeing, grass quality has really deteriorated. There's a lot of stem material present in the grass sward. So, look, ideally, where farmers can take out, some surplus grass, they'll correct the paddocks then for the next rotation. Look, the reality of it is some farmers are going to have to top out swards as well after grazing as well. So graze them out good and tight and get in quick with the topper and or the dismower and clean out them paddocks, just to ensure that the quality of regrowth will come for the remainder of the growing season. It's important to correct it now as soon as you can to keep the quality in the sward for the remainder of the grazing season, to try and encourage as much of a grass intake as you can.
And that's going to have a huge impact, Tommy, on the performance of cattle at grass. What are the key live weight target gains, farmers should be trying to achieve over the summer months, particularly to maximise performance on farm?
Yeah, look, and the summer months is really where the opportunity is in a calf to beef system, to get this cheap weight gain from grass, for your spring, your yearling born cattle going out to grass. You look at your targeting probably just shy of a kilo a day at grass. You'd be looking for a kilo a day for the first, 2.5 months at grass, and then that would dip slightly, back to 0.9 or 0.85, and it's important to keep that right quality grass in front of cattle, to ensure that the intakes remain high and that these weight gains are being achieved. And it has proved difficult. Cattle are, as I said, out later right around the country, and on some farms, we're seeing that weights are coming in, stock are slightly behind target. So it's more important than ever now for the remainder of the grazing season, to ensure that the grass quality is right up there, as high a quality grass as you can produce, to maybe even compensate for the late spring and the difficult grazing conditions so far this year.
You mentioned there the performance might be back on some farms and the delayed turnout. Some farmers might be considering introducing concentrates at grass to cattle. What factors should influence that decision?
Yeah, look, I suppose grass availability, grass supply, grass quality are all factors that you'd be looking at before introducing concentrates, Catherine. But look, it depends on the farm system. If a farmer needs to have X amount of cattle moved out of the farm before housing, they will need to look at introducing concentrates from the end of July to the first week of August, to get them stock on before the housing. So housing is a huge factor, and it's a limiting factor on a lot of calf to beef farms. You have a lot of stock going through the system, and the cost of housing now and the significant investment, farmers are trying to reduce the age of slaughter to finishing animals and move the animals on at a younger age. So it's a huge factor. But having cattle, you need to have cattle at target weights, before you introduce concentrates. Like for an early maturing steer system, you'd want bullocks or steers, you'd want them at least 480 kilos, and you want a level of cover on them already before you would start introducing concentrates. Similar enough for a Frisian steer system, you'd want them, that 480 to 500 kilos. Again, you'd want a softer type Frisian that you would be able to get finished without a massive high level of concentrate inputs. And then I suppose your early mature and heifer system, you're talking an animal probably 50 kilos, 50, 60 kilos lighter than that, in around 434, 40 kilos, where you'd be looking for a shorter finish. But, housing generally dictates what animals you can hold for the winter, and, you base your numbers on that. But if you haven't your stock on target, you're going to leave yourself a lot of work to do with concentrates, and sometimes it just mightn't be that cost efficient.
And it's particularly important, Tommy, you mentioned there, for farmers that has cattle that's approach and finish. What factors should they be considering? Some will be deciding whether they finish off grass, whether they're housed. You mentioned there, housing being an issue, and then maybe selling those stores as live this autumn.
The farmers that sold stores last year, Catherine, probably were the ones that made the most money. Look, and no, it's crystal ball stuff, but again, what housing is available on the farm really dictates whether when you have to shift on cattle. But getting as much weight in on your animals, be it whether you sell them as stores or finish them as bring them on to finish as beef, is the key. And get as much of that cheap weight in from grass as possible. Look, most of the farmers that we're working with, they're operating a calf to beef system, so they're taking the animals right through to slaughter in the majority of cases. So they have links built up with processors at this stage, and they have that understanding with the processors. But I suppose depends on the farmer's own individual circumstance whether they sell live or take them through to finish. But having as much weight on them, have as much weight on the animals as possible, will ensure that you get the maximum price that you can for them animals.
Tommy, in relation to animal health, what are the main risks at this stage moving into late summer, around parasites or respiratory issues that you're seeing on dairy beef farms, or what preventative measures should farmers be considering?
Yeah, look, again, farmers need to be paying particular attention to detail in terms of parasite control. The weighing scales, taking out the weighing scales, assessing performance, it's never going to lie to you in terms of how your animals are thriving. It'll also give you an indication if there's a parasite burden on your animals. So that's one way of seeing how healthy your animals and how well they are performing. So monitoring that, obviously monitor for clinical signs of parasites. Look at late summer, your worms is going to be your biggest burden. Your stomach and gut worms in your younger animals, and as we move into July, lungworm is going to become particularly relevant. I had warm spells, dry spells, and looking at forecasting that, it talks of warm spells and dry spells again. So that's a huge risk period for lungworm in younger calves and in older animals. So farmers need to be monitoring their cattle regularly. Fecal samples will determine, if you have burdens with stomach or gut worms. But, as regards lungworms, the best method of detecting an issue is where you see isolated coughs husky coughs starting to appear among a group of cattle. When there's 5-10% of the animals coughing, you need to really monitor it. And when that increases, you need to get in with a treatment of some sort to prevent that worm burden from increasing, because that's when when that lungworm burden increases, that's what can lead on to, as you said earlier on, Catherine, respiratory issues. And lungworms are one of the main causes of respiratory issues in cattle from late summer onwards. So keeping on top of that is going to be crucial to keeping your animals performing, keeping them healthy as we head into the latter half of the grazing season. Then
that's very important. You mentioned there, Tommy, farmers do take fecal samples and it shows up that they're clear, they might need a dose, but it really is the visual looking at calves to see are they coughing in order to detect lungworm. That's a key thing on dairy beef farms. The
visual one, exactly. When you start hearing the isolated cough among a group of calves, farmers need to be on the ball, because a lungworm outbreak, it could spread sporadically. And, when calves, they've such a small lung, there's a high kill of lungworm, and that can can be difficult for calves to cough up, and it can create respiratory issues and create long-term lung damage, and which will negatively affect performance of the remainder of their life.
Most definitely. And the National DairyBeef 500 Open Day is taking place on the farm of Keith and Olivia Lowry in County Galway on the 9th of July at 6:30 p.m. John, can you give listeners an overview of the dairy beef system and how it has evolved since joining the DairyBeef 500 programme?
I suppose firstly, Olivia and Keith, they're farming just outside Tuam here in County Galway, and they're operating predominantly a early mature and steer system with animals finished or sold live at 22 to 24 months of age at over the 600 kilos live weight. They're operating that system off just over 30 hectares of grassland. This year, they've reared 80 calves, and that's split 30 calves in the autumn of 25 and 50 calves this spring. That's just to make best use of facilities that are on the farm for calf rearing and to divide the workload over 2 periods, just with Olivia and Keith working off farm. As you've mentioned there, the farm has evolved substantially over the last number of years through their participation in the DairyBeef 500 program. Huge progress has been made. There's no one golden ticket to it. It's focusing in on a number of key areas across the farm to maximise efficiency on a per animal basis, firstly, and then set up the farm to increase stocking rate and drive output on a per hectare and profitability across the farm. So some of the areas that we focus in on, and it really is focusing on getting the basics right, is looking in at the calf sourcing and getting a better quality calf into the system. Looking in at improving grassland management on the farm and getting live weight gain on the animals right throughout the grazing seasons. And with that, investing in infrastructure on the farm to get better use of grass. Adopting a comprehensive animal health plan. And some of the key points Tommy has touched on there already throughout the lifetime of the calf on the farm. And also investment in other infrastructure across the farm to grow the farm in terms of carrying those extra numbers. One area in particular that they've invested in is increased slurry storage to be able to carry those extra animals over the winter. So look at it, the farm has developed substantially, and look at it, set itself up to grow with stocking rate improving over the last 4 years, where they were rearing 45 calves through to store. And this year, as I said, they've reared 80 calves. So they're doubled the calf numbers going through the system and getting more weight gain from every animal going through that system. So it has become a much more profitable system in that as well.
And that always have put a huge emphasis on sourcing those calves. You know, you mentioned that increase up to 80 calves from a small number of dairy farms. What benefit has it meant in terms of calf performance, animal health and overall management on the farm as a result?
I think it's something that the Lowrys have been very clear on from day one, from when myself and Tommy started to work with them with the programme. Like they realised if they were to increase calf numbers from where they were, 45 calves, up to where they are now, 75, 80 calves, that getting that calf right at the start was going to be the foundation for everything that comes after that. And look at, rather than just taking any calf that becomes available, they set about finding a few local farmers, developing a relationship with those, and growing it from there. And this year they've sourced all their autumn calves from one local dairy farmer, and all the spring calves have come from 3 local dairy farmers. So that's given them much more confidence over the calf that's coming into the system, that has got its early life colostrum management and early life nutrition before they arrive on the farm at 3 or 4 weeks of age. So it gives the animal that best chance to start performing from day one on the farm and achieving its lifetime targets throughout the various stages on the farm to have a profitable animal at the finish up.
And a lot of investment has gone in on the farm in relation to grazing infrastructure. How has that improved grass utilisation and production and labour efficiency on the farm?
Yeah, I think if anyone were to walk the farm today, and hopefully those listening, if they get a chance to visit the farm on the 9th of July, they'll see it. One thing that will stand out is the work that has gone into improving the grazing infrastructure on the farm, in terms of putting in a track or a farm roadway to open up the farm to be operated by one person very labour efficiently, location of water troughs and implementation of extra water troughs to be able to divide up paddocks more effectively, investment in fencing to divide up larger fields into smaller manageable paddocks. And look at all that together has created a very efficient system, manage grass much more effectively, growing more grass on the farm, utilising it down the animal's throat, and maximising animal performance in the back of that, and getting as much weight as possible from the cheapest feed on the farm in terms of grass, which is driving a very efficient and profitable system on the back of that. But it has to be very simple. As I mentioned, Olivia and Keith are working off farm, so the system, the setup has to work well within that. And it is, with the infrastructure that's been put in place, one person now, when they're looking at the animals in the evening time after work, can easily move animals to any paddock on the farm on their own without any help. And it's a very, very simple system. So it's working for the animal and it's working for the farmer.
Most definitely from a labour efficiency point of view. You also mentioned there reseeding had been a key part of the farm. Why has reseeding been such a priority, and what benefits had there been in relation to silage quality and animal performance?
Yes, so if we go back to before the Lowrys entered the DairyBeef 500 programme, and if we imagine that we're walking the farm, there would have been a lot of poor quality grass on the farm. And I suppose that was hindering itself to maybe poor animal performance over the grazing season, just with the poor grass swards. And that was leading to poor responses from chemical fertilizer that was being applied. And also on silage ground, I suppose older swards, poor quality silage being siled on the back of that. So one thing that would have been important to the overall system, if we're to grow a system and grow a stocking rate, you have to have a farm that can grow grass to match that stocking rate, and reseeding played a key role in that to improve the quality of the swards. To date, 35 acres on the farm has been reseeded. It has transformed the grass quality so far in that through its grazing season, improved grass quality, complementing the paddock system to drive animal performance at grass. But a massive area that it has played a significant role in is improvement in silage quality. This year, all the silage that's made on the farm is going to come from reseeded swards. So that's going to have a massive impact on improvement in silage quality to drive animal performance over the winter months on silage only, with very little supplementation, and keep animals on performing, but also reduce costs, as the need for supplementation will drastically reduce compared to poor quality silages of the past.
That's great, and a huge amount of work has been carried out on the farm over the last number of years. What can listeners expect to see on the evening?
I think what farmers will enjoy most about the evening that's coming up on the 9th of July is it's going to be very practical. And we're going to see the changes that have been made on the farm, and I suppose more importantly, see the thinking behind those changes. To see firsthand the grazing infrastructure that's been put in place, the paddocks, the water, the roadway, see the reseeded swards and how they're performing on the farm, and see the different groups of cattle within the system, and the live weight performance and carcass that are, and live weight that's been achieved from those animals. And we'll be discussing on the night also budgets. As Tommy mentioned, calf prices has gone up. Beef markets have regressed. So the need is there to understand what we can afford to pay for cows in the system, and what performance is required at the back of that to keep these animals performing on farm, to ensure that we have a profitable product at the end. So we'll be discussing that on the evening as well. A question we often get asked going around to farms is, can a calf to beef system still be profitable with the way calves are at the moment, in terms of the cost this year being significantly higher than previous years? I suppose the answer to that is the system has to be working for you. Like, we can't control the calf price or the beef price, but I suppose we have control over the quality calf that we buy, how we manage our grass, the animal health protocol on the farm, and what daily live weight gain we can potentially get on these animals, and the overall efficiency of the system. So I suppose that's the big take home that farmers will see on the evening, how Olivia and Keith have set up the farm to be profitable, and how good decisions made along the way can develop that system and maximize efficiency of animals on the farm, to be able to cope with changes in market conditions and drive profitability going forward.
That's great. We look forward to visiting the farm on the 9th of July. And finally, Tommy, you're working with a lot of DairyBeef 500 farms across the country, and a lot of new entrants completing the DairyBeef 500 course. For farmers that's considering or are currently operating a DairyBeef system, what would you say to encourage them to visit the farm on the 9th of July?
As John alluded to earlier on, with a lot of practical demonstrations, there's huge progress made on the farm over the past number of years. Like, there's a step-by-step planned approach. It was all streamlined, and what's probably really pleasant to see now is that the farm has cemented itself, and it has improved itself so much. And a lot of the work that has been done, it also has improved the labour efficiency on the farm, which is hugely important. For farmers, time is generally can be at a minimum on these farms. So, it's a working farm that's run streamlined, and what's really pleasant to see as well, the profitability of the farm has increased. I know some of that would have been down to increased beef prices last year, but beef price has regressed as John alluded to, and the farm has made itself more viable due to the improvements in efficiency, and that's a big thing for farmers that will take away from the event.
That's great. Thanks very much, John, and thanks very much, Tommy. We look forward to the National DairyBeef 500 Open Day on the farm of Keith and Olivia Lowry on the 9th of July. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
That's all for this week's episode, and my thanks to Tommy and John for joining me on the show. Check out the bonus Beef 2026 episode on grassland management. You can catch up on all other shows and interviews from the Beef Edge on the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie, or you can listen on Apple as well as Spotify. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe so you never miss a show. For all other updates from our beef programme, keep an eye on our Twitter and Facebook pages. Until next time, I'm Catherine Egan, and thanks for listening.